Assalamu alaikum everyone, I hope you're doing well inshallah. So today I'm resurrecting a series that's been put on hold for a bit, and the reason for that is because of an emergency piece of news where something else has been resurrected supposedly, which is the direwolf, Latin name Anision dirus. I hope I said that right. So what is the direwolf? The direwolf was a canine species that existed in North America from the late Pleistocene to the early Holocene age. So that would work out to being about 125,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago. This species existed in North America. And what it was a canine species. It was originally thought to be very closely related to the grey wolf that we have today, hence the name dire wolf. But, and I'm going to come back to this later on in this talk, studies in around 2021 and some scientific articles and literature started to, through analysis of what we have today in terms of canine species and the direwolf, started to indicate actually it's not so closely related to the genus Canis in which the grey wolf exists today. It's actually more, it has its own genus, so it's called Anision, and it was thought to occupy a more basal lineage of canine. So actually it was indicated from what I remember that the dhole, the Asiatic wild dog, which exists in India, Southeast Asia and Central Asia and is a red canine, and the African painter dog, which is a very colourful canine that exists in Africa, were actually more closely related to the dire wolf than the grey wolf. That was my understanding. And so yeah, so kind of naming it the wolf was a bit of an unusual title, but it played a very similar role to the North American grey wolf and grey wolf at large, in that it was hunting in a very similar way. It did have very similar body dimensions, so it was most closely physically comparable to the grey wolf that exists today. And yeah, it was existing in North America, where it existed with a ton of other apex predators. In that time, the Ice Age, North America was well known for having a wide diversity of massive carnivores, such as the giant short-faced bear, Smilodon, the big saber-toothed cats of that region. The American lion, the American cheetah. So there was a lot of North America at that time in the Ice Age really did resemble the African savanna of today. The direwolf. So some of these carnivores in North America at the time, they were large mammal megafaunal specialists. So what that means is that they would predominantly hunt large herbivores that existed in that time, such as the giant ground sloths, the massive bison, these kind of things that existed in that area. Whereas, the massive moose and these kind of things that exist in the area. The direwolf, to my knowledge, wasn't such a specialist in that manner, but it did hunt horses and giant ground sloths when it was given the opportunity. So it was a very capable apex predator in the region. But why are scientists saying that it's been resurrected today? Like, there was massive news out, Colossal Biosciences, a private company that has made it its life mission to resurrect extinct species, with a long aim of rewilding. Why are they saying that they have resurrected the dire wolf? Now, it's an amazing achievement. I want to say I'm really glad that Colossal Biosciences exists as an organization. I really like the efforts that they're doing. Hopefully a lot of what they're doing can be transitioned into protecting the species we have today. So yeah, I'm a massive fan. On the dire wolf one, I'm really happy that they've been doing this as well, but on a personal, just a small note, but like, for example, the Japanese wolf only went extinct very recently, and it would have been way easier to have resurrected, like have brought that back to life, and it would have, because it existed so recently as well. Japan is lacking, and I have been to Japan, and I've seen the very recently I went to Japan and I saw the vast amount of deer roaming the streets, Sika deer, which are very beautiful and very lovely species of deer, but they are wreaking havoc on nature there, because there's nothing keeping them in check. So they're stopping and stunting the growth of forests, returning, and it would, where Japan is, it really does need that apex predator. So hopefully they will work towards this in the future, but I see that as a quick win, like resurrecting the Japanese wolf and bringing that back into the environment, slotting it back where it does belong. But the dire wolf has been the selected one by Colossal Biosciences. How did Colossal Biosciences bring back these two, bring back this extinct species? Colossal Biosciences scientists had access to 2 skulls of dire wolves, and dire wolf skulls are not so rare. There are thousands of skulls that we have of dire wolves, especially in places like the La Brea tar pits, where loads of dire wolves accumulated towards the end of their death, especially what we consider being trapped there due to these pits trapping other large herbivores and then dire wolves being drawn in. So we've got lots of, and then sinking to their deaths. So we've got lots of dire wolf skulls, that's not an issue. But Colossal Biosciences predominantly used 2 skulls, one from around 15 to 20,000 years ago of a dire wolf, I believe, and then one of a dire wolf skull from 70,000 years ago. They managed to extract some of the DNA that existed in these skulls, and then they compared the DNA that they had extracted to living species of wolves that exist today. And something that's interesting is, in 2021 there was a study that talked about how dire wolves are not believed to have been so closely related to wolves despite what they look like, and they were actually considered to be more basal lineage, so they were considered to be more actually closely related to, they weren't even in the genus Canis as is indicated by their name, Anacyon, but they were considered to be, the closer relatives were considered to be African painted wolves or dolls. And it's interesting that Colossal Biosciences, they did their own comparison using the DNA extracted from these 2 dire wolf skulls, and then they considered dolls, Asian painted wolves, African painted wolves and grey wolves, and found that grey wolves are actually the closest related existing Canis carnivore species to the dire wolf, which I have some, I don't want to question science if that's what they say, but yeah, I just feel like there might be an element of, I really hope they've removed all bias, because of course using dolls and African painted wolves, if they were the more closely related species to dire wolves, using them as a vehicle to get the dire wolf back would have been quite controversial, because these 2 are very endangered species, whereas the grey wolf is a lot more accessible, a lot more easier to use to resurrect a dire wolf. So it's interesting that, you know, they went ahead and said that the grey wolf is the closer related species, and I do believe them. I am behind the science, but it's just, I hope that kind of issue doesn't become a factor in Colossal Biosciences going forward. I hope that they do find a compromise, or they do take the opportunity to wait until endangered and critically endangered species have recovered to resurrect an animal in its most purest form, rather than, you know, trying to find a quick stopgap to get there. But yeah, so what they did was they used those 2 skulls, extracted the DNA, compared it to the living species, determined the grey wolf is the closest living species, and then used the grey wolf as a basis. Using the grey wolf as a basis, edited the genome and the DNA of the grey wolf, edited the genome of the grey wolf to try and match it to the dire wolf in a way they thought was best. Now the issue I have is canine species have around 20,000 genes, and humans and mice have about 30,000, so canines have a bit less than the average human, or than any human basically. But the thing is, they only edited about 18 to 20 genes, and if you consider the difference between the dire wolf and the grey wolf, it's a lot more than that. You're talking about genes numbering in the hundreds or the thousands, so they've only edited about not in the thousands, but like they've only edited about 1.75% to 2% of the difference from the grey wolf to the dire wolf. So you can't really be calling it a dire wolf if it's only a grey wolf that's been edited about 1 to 2% to try and make it look like a dire wolf. I understand that this is a long-term goal and that they are working on creating an embryo that is going to be 100% dire wolf. But yeah, I just hope, I mean, you can't really control the media and the sensationalism that exists nowadays. So yeah, I think what it should be called is a grey wolf edited towards becoming a dire wolf, like a genetically modified grey wolf resembling a dire wolf. But it shouldn't be called, but if it's only 1 to 2% of the difference from grey wolf to dire wolf, I don't think it's fair labeling it dire wolf and just having it there. But nevertheless, this is, I'm going to pop it up on the screen now, so this is a very beautiful canine that has been created by Colossal Biosciences. You can see it does look a bit like one of those Arctic wolves that exist in Canada and up in the far north, but there are some very key differences here. So one thing that immediately struck out for me was it's so just to clarify, there's two males that have been created, like two males that have been created, one being named Romulus and the other being named Remus, of course after the legendary Roman story. So a few things strike out for me. One is the strength of the forelimbs. So they are a lot more rigid and a lot more structurally sound than I'd say the majority of grey wolves that exist today. Another thing that really strikes out is the snout area. So you can see this is a much more robust snout than even the Arctic wolves and even the larger species of wolves, wolf subspecies like the Mackenzie wolf. You can really see the robustness of that snout. You can see structurally, this is only a 6-month-old, by the way, and so it's not even fully grown yet. It's only about 60 to 70% of the way to being fully grown, but you can already see the robustness of this creature. You can also see the coating of the coat. It's a very brilliant white. So Colossal Biosciences indicated towards this as well. But often when dire wolves are portrayed in paleontological art and in the media, they're portrayed as red, whereas it's very through studying the genome, Colossal Biosciences learned that they actually are a brilliant white. So yeah, that's really coming out in this creature here. And also this kind of a mane that's developing even at such a young age. It's a very interesting feature, and it does make it a bit more distinct from the larger grey wolf subspecies. Although of course we have to factor in that this is a grey wolf which has been edited with more which has had its morphological genes edited to be more closely related to a dire wolf. So yeah, another thing that I've heard is you know, that these creatures are making a very different vocalization, very different sounds to a typical grey wolf, and that is because of some editing that has occurred to make them more in line with a dire wolf. And I'm interested to see how it plays out once it's fully mature. These individuals, I want to see how they develop. Inshallah, they do develop to become healthy adult individuals, and they have a younger sister who's growing up behind them a little bit. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how she develops as well. And from my understanding, Colossal Biosciences, they are looking to develop a strong pack that is going to exist in this region that they have purchased, where they're looking after these creatures right now, and they're looking to build on this pack and see how they live and interact in the wild, or the semi-wild, I'd say. So now I think it's kind of time to touch on Colossal Biosciences and what their purpose is and what they're all doing, what they're all about. So Colossal Biosciences, they are working towards bringing some extinct species back to life and then rewilding them, in the sense of kind of undoing the wrongs that happened with many of the megafauna extinctions, because humans are often seen as one of the reasons behind, or in the very least accelerating some of the megafauna extinctions that happen around the world. So their purpose is by bringing species back to life, such as the woolly mammoth, or by creating parallels to these species as in a way that they have created for the direwolf, where they edit an Asian elephant to resemble a woolly mammoth as much as possible. They create a creature which is able to fulfill the niche that the mammoth held in the Siberian tundra, and then kind of bringing back a lot of species around it, supporting the species, bringing back the biodiversity, and then in a way helping solve climate change, because the area where the woolly mammoth used to roam, a lot of that's turned into tiger forest now, which is not as beneficial as the savanna that existed in that area before, because of the woolly mammoth. And a lot of this is being done to help fight climate change. Now, an instant concern of mine is, like, not concern, but like a wonder is like, why the direwolf? I feel like, a very famous TV series, and I don't want to go too much into it because for me it does promote degeneracy, but it did really bring the direwolf to the forefront of the people's perceptions, and they did depict the direwolf very accurately. So I feel like this is kind of a way of hitting the layman and being like, look at the work we're doing, this is really amazing work, and getting them excited, which I could support to some degree. But in all realness, like what I mentioned before about the direwolf, it doesn't have a very specialized niche, and I feel like North America does have some of the largest grey wolf subspecies in the world, which are hunting the prey that exists there today. So I don't understand what the long-term goal is of the direwolf. I don't know how they're going to go and rewild this. I guess the direwolf, for me, this was a small project, which is quite easy relative to bringing other species back, because we do have Canis lupus, like the grey wolf that exists today. It is morphologically very similar to the direwolf, albeit a lot less stocky, but it is very similar to the great direwolf that existed back then. So like it's quite easy relatively then, say, bringing back the Tasmanian tiger like that, which they're also working on which I'm far more in support of. And yeah, but I just feel like, in terms of wolf species, the Japanese wolf would have been a far better target to hit initially. It would have kind of, but I mean, these are amazing scientists working on this, so I don't want to critique them too much, and I'm fully behind what they're doing. And yeah, it's just it's interesting, that the direwolf, if they do try and create a more purified version of it, I would love to see that. I'm not gonna lie, I would love to see that. So yeah, just to recap, direwolf was a species of canine that existed in history up until 10,000 years ago. They've managed, Colossal Biosciences, a private company, have managed to extract some DNA from 2 skulls of these direwolves, and then have compared it to the living species that exist today of canine, determined the grey wolf is the closest living relative to the direwolf, and then have used a grey wolf as a template and as a basis, gene edited it to make it about 1 to 2% more on the way to being a direwolf, 1 to 2% more on the way to being a direwolf, and they focused this 1 and 2% on morphological features to try and make it as close as physically possible to the direwolf. It is missing, it's going to be missing the behavioral aspects, these kind of things, and I wonder if they did start off with a doll or an African painted wolf, which they're saying that isn't the closest relative, but if they did, and it does turn out that that is based on later science, if those behaviors could have been more closely paralleled. But as they're saying, grey wolf seems to be the closest living relative, so they're working off the right basis as current science stands. And yeah, it's very interesting. So just to reflect, I wouldn't call it a direwolf species. I wouldn't call it a direwolf right now. I would say it's a grey wolf that has been genetically modified 1 to 2% towards being a direwolf, but very excited to see what the future holds. Very excited to see, once they do get that 100% or close to 100% direwolf, what that's going to look like. And it'll be very interesting to see the comparison between this genetically modified grey wolf and a much more genetically modified grey wolf that is way closer to a dire wolf. See the comparison between the two and see what connotations and what effects that's going to have on future research on much more difficult to clone species going forward, or not clone, but much more difficult species to genetically alter towards, and see how that research pans out in the future. So thank you all for watching this episode of Fossil Focus, and stay tuned, inshallah.